Okay, go ahead and start. Yeah, thank you. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the June 2nd, 2022 Incarceration Prevention and Reduction Task Force Steering Committee meeting. Before we begin, we acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional and unceded territory of the Lummi, Nooksack, Samish, and Semiahmoo people who have cared for and tended this land since time immemorial. Truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and connection across all barriers of heritage and difference. We begin this effort to acknowledge what has been buried by honoring the truth. We pay respect to their elders, past and present. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that brings us together here today. And please join us in uncovering such truths at any and all public events. So Jill, you want to run us through the hybrid stuff?
Yes, thank you. Just FYI, we're having our first hybrid meeting today, so please be patient while we work out all of our kinks in the new system. Barry, if it's okay, I've got a couple of notes before we get started.
Yep.
First of all, welcome. Chief Tank is here. He's expressed some interest in joining our meeting, so he's here with us today.
Welcome, Tank.
Jackie.
Thank you.
Jackie Lassiter will have some information for us on GARE. I'll need about 10 minutes for the annual report, 10 to 15 minutes, because we've had some changes this morning. And if you want to discuss the communications contract on the council agenda, we can do that in other business. So that's everything I have. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Jill. Anything else before we get rolling from staff or anybody? Okay, seeing none, we will go ahead and call it to order. I call to order the steering committee meeting for June 2nd, 2021. It's a little after 11 and we are meeting in a hybrid mode today. Our first item is an update on the Justice Project and the Stakeholder Advisory Committee. We have our next meeting, which is meeting number 3, which is focused on behavioral health and some of the gap analysis that's been done by the health department and some stakeholders. And they will be presenting that next Thursday at our Stakeholder Advisory Committee meeting. We're excited to have been working hard. Stephen and Jack and I and some staff members and our consultant are excited about that meeting. Some of the things that have kind of come up that are a little new that for this group, we are working on a kind of an in-custody survey. We got permission from Wendy to utilize, we'll be using David Goldman, who does a lot of the educational programs in the jail, to help us conduct the survey. So we're working right now on drafting that and getting some, meaningful questions that we can get into folks that have lived experience in the system. Jill mentioned a communications consultant. That there's 2 communications efforts underway. One is for the task force itself, and that's the one that Jill alluded to. The other one is a specific endeavor to have public communication out regarding the process for the needs assessment itself and the Stakeholder Advisory Committee. So right now, where that's at, we've identified a vendor. And we're working with them now to finalize the scope and details of the contract and the price and so on. Kathy Halka is working with them on that. So that we should have more news on that next month. Other than that, the project is rolling around, along well. And I think we've trying to set up now an additional behavioral health meeting where the stakeholder committee members will meet with Mike and Dan and be able to talk about the work that's being done in the behavioral health subcommittee of the task force. So a lot of interest. There's been super attendance in every meeting that's been called so far, and we've had quite a few. So anyway, that's the update for today. If there's any questions, would love to answer them. Okay, seeing none, we will move on to GARE implementation strategy. And Jackie, I think Jill said you were going to help us out with that.
Yeah. So we had talked earlier about me kind of pulling some items of interest from the GARE portal occasionally or on a regular basis. So I just kind of took a first stab at it. So I'll go ahead and share my screen. Jill, I'm a participant. Can you allow me to share the screen?
Yeah, give me 1 sec to do that. You should have screen or share screen ability now.
Okay. It still says a disabled participant screen sharing.
Okay, I'll give it a try.
Yep, perfect, thank you. Okay, so the first thing I found were a couple of items in the area called tools and issue papers. So there's the racial equity toolkit and opportunity to operationalize equity. So this paper, as far as I can tell, I didn't read it in its entirety, but it seems that it's more of a, so we have the actual toolkit that a lot of you have already reviewed. This seems like it's more, it goes more in depth on the steps and how they can be implemented. So I know we've been talking a lot about, you know, how to, okay, we have this list of steps, like how can they actually be used? So I thought that this might be a useful tool to kind of look more in depth. It's pretty, let's see, it's almost 30 pages with the appendix. So it's pretty detailed. It might be kind of, it might take some time to get through, but I thought it might be useful. The other thing I have here is how-to manual for action plans. So kind of along those same lines, just this one's a little bit more, I guess, user-friendly, a little more digestible. It has some information on how to actually form an action plan if you're looking to kind of formalize a, well, an action plan for the group or for a government organization. So that could be helpful to the task force. And then there's a couple of slide decks from what looks like there was their annual membership committee that took place in April. And it looks like they have published some slide decks. Unfortunately, they don't come with recordings of the actual presentation, so that they're a little bit less useful than they could be. But there's a couple of topic areas that I thought might be of interest to the task force. So how to rein in the high cost of incarceration. This talks a lot about, seems a lot about specifically phone calls. But there might be some other topics covered too. So like I said, I wish that we could hear the actual presentation from the people who gave this, put together this slide deck. Their contact information is here too. So it looks like there's some people from San Francisco government and some nonprofits. So then the second one that the same people looks like gave a presentation also on cities and counties for fine and fee justice. So this is another slide deck, kind of same deal. The last thing I want to share is that there is a film screening coming up. So it's A Crime on the Bayou, and it looks really interesting. So they're airing it on Zoom, and it's at noon on June 10th. And then they're going to have a Q&A with the person who is the protagonist of this, I think it's a documentary, but so it centers around a Supreme Court case and the person who was the main defendant in that. So Q&A with him, and then with a journalist. Yeah, so I thought that might be interesting. I know that It looks like there is a Zoom link, but you have to register for it. So I'm assuming that it would only be open to the actual members of GARE. So the people with the county email addresses. I don't know if it would be possible to kind of hold like a screening room, like in like our conference room, if other people wanted to join. I don't know if that if that jives with our contract with GARE or not, but and then the other thing I just wanted to bring up was that they did just have their annual membership meeting. Like I said, it looks like it was in April. I don't know when the next one will be. I'm assuming it'll be sometime next year. I don't know if this is something that you all would be interested in trying to kind of get a representative to go to next year, if that would be like a budget item you would want to consider, but I just thought I would mention, I have no idea what the cost is because the registration is closed for last year, obviously. So I just wanted to bring that up as well. So that's what I have.
Thanks, Jackie. Other than that movie screening, are all the other tools available to the general public?
They're all PDFs. I don't know if it's kosher to email them out, or I don't know what the kind of the rules are.
But I guess my question would be, is that something that anybody could find if they went to the GARE website and just look for resources?
Yeah, I had to log in. So I think anybody who's able to log in would be able to find it.
Okay.
Vera, you can get the toolkit. I believe, Jackie, you said it was 30 pages. That is obtainable to anybody. You do not have to be a member of GARE to access some of those PDFs and prints, but I think it probably varies. I don't know if that's true about the second one that Jackie showed, but I know the first one because I'm familiar with that. And that's actually, we brought that to the task force, I think, and kind of peeled the toolkit out of that. That was part of our genesis, if you will, for the conversation, and which led us to, hey, we really need to join this. This has got some meat on it. So, and I raised my hand, Barry, for another one. And I don't know if you're going to call me because I think it was specific about, could people access that? But I guess my question is a larger one. And I've heard a little bit of conversation, and one was about steering committee members being able to access it. I know I don't think we have full clarity on that, although I'm curious if there is more clarity on that. I think we had some willingness from county. I'm just wondering what we need to do to move the needle on that. Should we reach out to Director, I believe it was Goodwin, to find out, my understanding from membership meetings before Whatcom County joined as an official member, and we're still celebrating that, by the way, we think that's a great move, but was that they really wanted to foster cross-jurisdictional representation, participation, collaboration, right, across systems. So it seems to me in that spirit that they would be more likely to have kind of more expansive view of membership, its resources, and its ability of task forces to do that. But I'm just wondering what it would take to move the needle on that, and if reaching out to the director of GARE might be helpful.
I was hoping that Jed Holmes was going to be here this morning because he's the one that's kind of been coordinating with GARE. Executive Sue, I see you're on the line. Are you available do you have any information on how we might be able to get access to folks that are on the steering committee and or the task force that don't have county email addresses?
Access to to make new emails, you mean?
No, for GARE resources. What they're telling us is that you have to have a county email address to be able to get in through the, I guess, the portal or whatever to access some of those resources.
Yeah, let me do the search. I don't have an answer offhand, but it should be possible.
I think the answer, Mike, is that the administration really needs to, I think, reach out because they're the ones that initiated the contract. So let's try that angle.
Let's try that angle, or put it on a different place on the website, because there is no confidential information. I don't believe so.
No, it's just a policy they have that you have to be a member, and that you're a member if you have an email address. So
yeah. Okay, let me look into that. Offhand, I don't know how to solve this issue, but we will definitely look into this. Yes.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Stephen.
Yeah, I would just underscore what Mike was implying, that I think that access is a matter of urgency for the task force, because we're sort of out in front on this. And so that would be great to hear back what progress we can make. I also agree with Mike that the toolkit itself, that document that Jackie showed first, has been circulated to the task force, but I haven't seen any of the other stuff. And so, Jackie, I'm wondering if it might be possible to download them and then distribute them to us, which I think would be sort of a workaround to the direct access kind of thing. And especially that how-to manual, which I think would be extremely helpful within the administration, but also would be helpful to the task force and the subcommittees as well.
I would say as long as we're not breaking a contract, something that we've signed that says we won't do that. So I don't know what the details are. Jack?
Just remembering about 8 years ago, for a couple of years, I was a CASA or guardian ad litem, which is a volunteer county position. And I remember we had county email addresses. I had to sign some form. I apologize, Executive Sadhu or Barry, if that's something you guys don't want to get into, but I did want to mention that certainly there are cases where people are not on a county payroll where they have county email addresses. I had one for quite a while when I was doing that. And Chief Tank, thanks for being here. Good to have you.
Yeah, Chief Tank, go.
I think it would be interesting to find out from GARE exactly what the benefits are for people that have login access versus not. So when I went on their website under their resource tab, it's no less than 15 to 20 documents available to people that do not have a login. So, you know, I'm just really curious to what extent does the login have for those people that can log in. So I think if we just had maybe a side-by-side, so to speak, to determine what the advantages are, that would give us a better direction.
Yeah, I was wondering the same thing because I did the same thing you did. I logged on to, or I mean, I went on to the website, the public website, and I did find a lot of documents. So I was wondering, what's the difference? What additional things are available for members that aren't just for the public? Jill?
On my review of the portal, the subscription website, I think that they're really promoting the networking ability of all of its members. They're trying to get all of the members to engage with each other via those discussion groups and sharing information. That to me, I think, is the first and primary difference between the member portal and the public website.
Okay, thanks, Jill.
Jill, I was going to nominate you because I knew you did that research. So I really appreciate that because I think that helped us see part of the benefits. And then obviously GARE membership only meetings, convenings throughout the year, which we understand there's more than just the annual, would be obviously another benefit, or maybe exclusive, if you will, to members.
Stephen.
And I'd just like to emphasize that this is not just an IPRTF interest. The Racial Equity Commission stakeholder group is banking on access to GARE information and networking. Several new county task force are in the process of organizing. All of them list racial equity as within their core goals. So this sweeps across a non-employee, but very much county service range of boards and commissions. And to me, that enhances the importance of solving this and solving it quickly.
Mike.
Just going to offer that after Dr. Damani Johnson's presentation to the task force, I did reach out to Dr. Johnson. You know, I think I expressed this at the end of that meeting. One, I really appreciated the work of the statewide group that's looking at racial equity across our Washington state system. And I just wanted to get this on record that he offered that Ms. Cynthia De Los Trinos is a staff person with the Racial Justice Consortium who's offered to engage or take input from local groups, or we might reach out to for updates from that group on their status from that person. So I want to bring that to the task force and then figure out who might be the best person to reach out to Ms. Delastrinos. But just wanted to let you know that Dr. Johnson was great, replied super fast. And I would just love for us to be able to stay in collaboration, concert, sidestep, whatever it looks like that's going to further our, or if we're ahead of them, then maybe we can fuel them. So I just offer that to maybe the co-chairs about who would be the best person to reach out to Ms. Delastrinos.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Anything else on the GARE itself? We have Raylene, I think you have some information on a California Racial Impact Assessment tool.
Yeah, because we were talking about GARE, and I recently attended the District Municipal Court Management Association conference via Zoom. They had speaker Mr. Michael Roosevelt, who's the chairperson of the work group to eliminate disparities and disproportionate center of families, children, and the courts of the Judicial Council of California, Administration Office of the Courts. And it was just a different look at how they're using their tool and how the courts could implement the tool. And as we've been talking about GARE and how to implement it, some of the questions that have came to me from other committee users is, we like GARE, we want more information, we want to stay involved, but some of them were questioning on how to implement it. And some of this may be redundant. You guys may have heard it. I've been involved in a lot of different meetings, a lot of education recently. So my apologies, and I'll try to make this quick and painless. But, you know, one of the projects, I think this is in your packet, was to briefly describe a proposed action. So they took all of us that were at that conference via Zoom and broke us up into small groups and then said, you have to pick a project that you need to do. So somebody brought up continuing court via Zoom. Is that something we want to do for more people? And what are the issues with it? And then you go into the demographic information and why do we need to do this? Why can't people attend court? They were doing it before COVID. So there was questions on that. And then they were saying, well, there's issues with people getting to court. And then they said, well, not everybody has the technology to get Zoom. So lots of different problems. And then they said, okay, who is the target population for not attending court? Do they have to be in court or not? What would it be like if we didn't have it? What are the requirements? What are the intended outcomes for these proposals and the actions of the project? So we didn't go through the entire toolkit, but it was a different and unique look at it. So if you were to say, we're building a new criminal justice center, whether it's in Blaine with a court and police department, or it's the new criminal justice center that's just been voted on and approved by the county, that we have this new center established, where are we going to stick it? What are the dynamics? What are the things that we want to involve? And so if you can open it up for a little bit of discussion now, it's like, what is the project? What is the goal? Who are we serving? This is where the index committee comes into, and what are we doing to eliminate disparities and disproportionality? Any comments, thoughts? Arlene.
Arlene.
Yeah, this question that you're talking about, it refers back to the more general issue of who does this hurt and who does this help? That kind of evaluative question, because transportation issues or technology issues are harder on the poorest population. So, you know, you don't think about that unless you ask these evaluative questions that Raylene is talking about. And it's a different way of looking at everything, and important to change things and make things more fair.
Thank you, Stephen.
Raylene, thank you for sharing that. Maybe I'm missing something, but I don't think that's different at all. I think what you went through are exactly the 6 questions on the GARE Racial Equity Toolkit buried in that 28-page document. And I think so many people are paying attention to this right now that everybody is rewording it a little bit in a way that might work for them or address their particular focuses. But if I distill the series of questions you ran through from that conference, that sounds to me like the toolkit. It sounds to me like what we're struggling with a little bit to give our own little focus on it. Mike, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that would be different.
Not that are different, but I would just add some of the conversations Stephen and I have had with staff about a way to make more formal our progress or lack thereof in terms of racial equity, in terms of our decision making. And Stephen, I don't know if you wanted to talk about that at all, just kind of some of those efforts, some of our thinking behind trying to get some kind of a framework and or a document to help us track. But it seemed like a decent time to interject, because I do think that what Raylene is bringing up, it is a synergy very much with the toolkit that we've already adopted here.
I just want to comment. I agree. It was just a different direction, a different aspect of it being displayed to a different group. And there was, each group had a different project. And there was a group, we're hiring a new employee. Who's going to be on the interview panel? What does the application look like? How are we advertising this position? What are the demographics of the areas? So it was actually, we had to come up with a project. We had to implement the tool. And I think that's something that I've heard from other people that are struggling. Yes, we want to do this. How do we do it? And there's so much information out there. Sometimes doing it is easier than just reading about it.
Yeah, I completely appreciate that, the importance of that aspect of it that you've described, Raylene. And that's really the way it ought to be, because the inherent racism of the system has gone into every nook and cranny of how we operate. So you need to be addressing those questions in almost every decision you make. Otherwise, there's a good chance they'll turn out with inequitable results. Just to accept Mike's invitation very briefly, Mike and I have met with Jill and Jackie in some, what to me were very fruitful conversations, starting with the idea of documenting the fact that when we, as a task force, make a recommendation or make a decision, we record that in some way to hold ourselves to the process of those questions, B, to document to the outside world that we have shown some fidelity to that. That's not such an easy thing to come up with a usable way to do that. We do have the questions. We have a couple of drafts of how those might look for the task force itself and the subcommittees. Mike has come up with a couple of other similar kinds of tools that guide an analytical decision-making process. So I think the last communications Mike and I have had about this is we want to try to schedule something with Jill and Jackie for the 4 of us to try to move those steps along a little bit, to make concrete, to figure out ways, as you say, Raylene, to implement this in a little more usable form.
Thank you.
Yeah, that sounds good, Stephen. I'm glad you guys are keeping the finger on the pulse on the implementation and working with staff. Anything else on the equity piece? Okay, we'll move on to the VERA report recommendations. I have in my notes here that the Behavioral Health Subcommittee was going to report out on this. Mike, do you have something for us?
Not quite report out, but I can certainly contextualize it. So in at one of our most recent, it might have been the last one, but I think our last one was a joint meeting with Legal and Justice. But we talked about recommendations from the VERA report. And we're interested, similarly to the letter to Whatcom County Council about ARPA funds. It was more of a request for status. So I think from the behavioral subcommittee, we realized, one of our members actually brought up and said they weren't familiar with their VERA report. They were since provided with the VERA report, but it gave us all on the subcommittee kind of a time for pause. And please, Arlene or Stephen, I don't think you were in attendance at that time, so please jump in if I'm not capturing it correctly. But we wanted to kind of just propose and bring to the steering committee that maybe a time for formal reckoning. I don't know if you've all read Jill's draft of the report. I know we're going to hit that. She talks about the VERA report, but it occurred to me that other than that has not been a subject at steering or at the meeting of the task force as a whole. So it was a request from behavioral subcommittee to the steering. Would it make sense for us to do a reckoning against that?
I know Jack did an analysis on that and provided us summaries, and I can't remember exactly where you presented that, Jack, but I thought it was here. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, there's something in the annual report, and I don't know, maybe I'm missing what you're framing here, Mike, but I don't know that reckoning where we are to VERA's recommendations inherently has a lot of value. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. There's a lot of recommendations under basically 5 categories. I know Stephen and I, in earlier steering committees, we would talk about VERA's recommendations. And of course, in the recent stuff in the annual report, we talked about those areas where we saw opportunities. But the concern I would have with measuring where we are to VERA, it would almost be an acknowledgement, a tacit acknowledgement that VERA is exactly what we're trying to achieve. And at least when the VERA report came out, I wouldn't say the task force consensus was 100% behind all the VERA recommendations. So that's the issue. If we're measuring or reconciling against it, I think you'd have to have agreement that's the standard that you're trying to achieve. I think a more appropriate thing is to keep looking at it for ideas that are still valid. There's still quite a bit of it in there. I have found it very useful and very enlightening, so those are my thoughts on it. I would say if there are members unfamiliar with it, which makes sense because it was a huge deal. I don't think you were there. I think it was 20. I know Stephen and Barry. I think Barry was there. But in 2017, we had a huge presentation. I think it was 17, where they came in and we met at the the annex across from City Hall. We were downstairs. It was food. They were there for hours. Probably 50 people there, and certainly something maybe not quite that large, but certainly a presentation. I'd be willing with Stephen to do, if people would like to know what VERA said, we could kind of recreate that to some extent. I think that potentially is helpful. Like, we're not saying this is what we should do. We're saying here's what VERA recommended we should do and why. And if you think that's useful, I think that time may be better than trying to reconcile our activities against them. Those are my thoughts on it.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification, Jack. If I might really quick, Stephen, just to clarify that it was about those things. And I do know that not everything that VERA proposed were things that we adopted, that the task force agreed with. So thank you, Jack, for bringing that up. It would be more those things that we did agree, that we did think were in alignment, those things that we wanted to do. The other thing, as you were talking, Jack, it jogged my brain, was from an evaluation standpoint. So there's a lot of data in VERA. And we wondered too, some of the things that Jill so industriously laid out in our report, task force members and behavioral subcommittee are curious about how much have we moved the needle with the various things that we've done. So obviously the VERA report contains some data. It helped crystallize, I think, some movement in certain areas we have, and they're listed out various initiatives and programs that we've been implementing. Our call is to measure, well, how did we do on those things? How did we affect jail population in one way or another, meaningful or not, based on those activities? So that would be the second piece, but well understood your point, Jack. That makes a lot of sense.
Well, and presenting it, I think, gets people spinning their heads with a good idea. Like, I think one of the great things about VERA in that discussion, it'll get people thinking along the lines of where VERA wanted them to go. And I think that inherently has value. So thanks.
Stephen.
There's definitely a lot of value in what Jack proposes from an informational point of view. And I think listing what we've done, highlights some really good work. But what I take from this is a turn toward the few places where we could take action but have not. And the one thing that always sits in my mind is there was a recommendation for how long it was taking in Superior Court to process a case from booking to resolution. They had data for that. We were a huge outlier amongst all Washington counties. So the only thing that happened with that was the judges, most of whom aren't there anymore, met with Dave McEachran and the public defender's office. They talked. They didn't give much information about that, but it was clear that they hadn't made a lot of progress. They were nipping around the edges of that. We have no data on what case processing times are now. It would be challenging with COVID intervening, but that would be a place, and that would make a huge difference for those people who continue to be detained. If we could shorten that, if we could just get back to the state norm even, or know where we are compared to other counties. And we've really literally done almost nothing with that. And I know dealing with the judges, they're sort of just beyond the boundary of what the IPRTF really can do. So that's a delicate matter, but I think we could have a little bit more of an action focus on pressing questions like that VERA raised for us, documented the need for, and that we haven't taken up. There aren't a lot of them, but I think that's the most dramatic one to me from my recollection.
Thanks, Stephen. Arlene.
Yes, this to me is about letting people know where we succeed and where we fail. And the failures are a direction of what still needs to be done. So it could be useful to use a couple of examples like this in our PR work, letting the community know that we've accomplished something in a particular area, but that we still have a long way to go on this particular issue of time. And the speediness of a processing in the justice system and in the restoration system too, right? We had lots of research about the long time it takes to restore people for trial. So it's come up several times in different ways, and it's worth talking about. I think we have less control over that issue than other things, and it's worth pointing that out too. But then we have to start thinking about how do we pressure the entities that do have control. Is there some way that we can start to lean on them to make changes? So, and there usually are.
And I'd like to kind of respond to that, because there's something that I've been discussing with some of the judicial officers, in particular Judge Grokemal, concerning restoration and competency evaluations, and how we might be able to do some of that locally, where we wouldn't be in line for that clogged up system. And we just batted around a few ideas. We met for about an hour a couple of weeks ago, and one of them was to be able to utilize some of the resources that we have, like WASAC, and there's a similar affiliation for judges in the state that can help lobby and speak to the legislature about how we might be able to get that and get it funded as well. Of course, we don't want to be handed unfunded mandates, but that is something that I'm looking at and trying to form a plan on how we might get some progress in that area. Anything else on VERA? Raylene and then Caleb.
Just real quick, going back to the VERA report and what Stephen Gockley had said about the number of days between case filing dates, disposition dates, how long it's taking to process it. And I echo the agreement that right now it's really difficult to do that because of COVID. We'd have to look at numbers from before COVID and then post-COVID numbers as things move along. But I think it's going to take a couple of years to clear out, not only because of COVID, but because of the Blake decision. And I'll speak about another data query that I'm helping Caleb with that I'm a little delayed on. I was hoping to get it to him sooner, but as we were talking, I was able to run 2018 stats for Whatcom County with charge disposition dates from how long it took for those cases to go from the beginning of the file date to a final disposition date. Those queries are fairly easy to run for courts of limited jurisdiction. I'm not sure how the Odyssey statistic program works, but I think something to that extent could be done from prior to COVID, and then we can see how it changes about 2 to 3 years out.
Caleb.
I'm going to try not to soapbox. So if you catch me, somebody reach out and virtually slap me. But this concept of average length of stay is something that we've been watching pretty closely over the last few years. And I'm not going to speak specifically about it, but I think that it would be very telling to look at the average length of stay for Superior Court charges pre-trial now versus when the VERA report did their analysis of the system. It's ridiculous. Again, I'm not going to soapbox, but we have a building that was designed for 148 people that yesterday morning we had 210 people in. That's with some of the most aggressive booking restrictions we've ever had. That's with all of the diversions in place. That's with all of the efforts that we've undergone in the last years to try and reduce jail population. And we have not a single bed to offer to anybody for any reason. It is, it's very frustrating. We're very much caught in a rock and a hard place here situation. So I think that as a number, as a metric that I think we could really get a hold of and look at in terms of it's very telling. The number of resolutions that we have on a case through Superior Court, which is primarily what we're holding anyway, is just very low. We have very few resolutions. We have a lot of cases that are pending. At one point, we had 10 people who were fully sentenced between the two buildings, and our population today was 320. That's just a very, very severe imbalance. And people are just getting stuck. It almost doesn't matter how many people we turn away from the facility if we can't get anybody out once they're here. So it's just very, very frustrating for the staff and for everybody who's trying really hard to maintain. So again, not going to soapbox, but this has been really, really difficult.
Thanks, Caleb. I agree. That's why I when Jill asked me about things to put on our agenda for today, I mentioned the pretrial services, getting a status from what's going on there, because we haven't heard from them in a while. And so we stuck that under items for next task force agenda. Maybe we could bat that around a little bit when we get there, because I agree with you. That was one of the top concerns that VERA had, was our pretrial population. So I think it's important that we keep our, keep up on what's going on there. Mike?
Caleb, you didn't need the soapbox. You got me. I just wanted to share, this is not my testimony. This is from one of our behavioral subcommittee members who read the VERA report. And when we had a brief discussion afterwards about what it meant to him and how important it was to bring this to steering, he said every day that somebody of people that are like me, this is a person of color, are locked up, we are not with our families. And he was quantifying thousands and thousands of days of that people are not with their families, not rehabilitating, not able to do gainful and meaningful work, not able to rehabilitate, not able to get well. And the human cost to what Caleb just brought up is immense. And this pain was so intense, it brought me to tears in having a conversation with him. So I know sometimes we struggle to enunciate the human cost of what we talk about in these meetings, but it is so incredible. It is so immense, and it's on staff, and it's on the families, and it's on people that are awaiting adjudication. And I just wanted to share that with you all. Obviously, this is the person can't join and tell you himself, but I just wanted to share how impactful that is and how meaningful, and whatever we can do to know, as Caleb is saying, where we're at. And hopefully that will help us galvanize and redouble efforts to make incremental change. But we can't lose sight of that human cost.
This is why we're here. This is why we're in this room, so to speak. This is why we give our time. This is why it matters. And so to support Caleb, I would say every once in a while, we need to express our passion about how we feel about all this. It's definitely worth the work that we're doing. And I do see change, and it's not enough, of course. And we just keep walking and working. And, but I don't know that there's ever been a time that I've felt more hopeful than currently in the possibility of changes locally. So I'm grateful for all of you.
Caleb?
So there's a couple of things that I would say somewhat in response, and then I've got some feedback too. So the thing that I would caution against is looking at this from a purely statistical standpoint. I mean, we can get statistics that say, yeah, this is how many people we've had and this is how long it's taken them to resolve. But that hits home more realistically when you talk about the anecdotes, like what Mike is talking about, where you have an interaction with a specific person who had an experience that is part of their legacy, that is part of their individual story, but it paints a picture, a broad brushstroke necessarily, of what is going on in the greater criminal justice system. And so picking out some specific stories, because there's a lot of factors. It's not simply a matter of saying, well, the prosecutors are taking too long, or the public defenders are taking too long, or the judges aren't available. There's a lot of factors. There's a lot of reasons why we're at where we're at today. But I do want to say that we are keeping on here at the Corrections Bureau, the Sheriff's Office, but I cannot overemphasize this enough. We are down 11 corrections deputies today. We will be facing some of the most intense amount of overtime for staffing shortages that we've ever faced. This is a very, very critical time for us moving forward, and having such an acutely challenging population and critically high numbers of population, combined with the amount of work that everybody's having to do to shoulder this burden. We're at the very beginning of a very, very steep uphill climb for our corrections staff. And just putting that out there, this doesn't help in the grand scheme of things to say, hey, yes, we're also going to be housing 329, 330 people in our system that's already overburdened. Again, not trying to soapbox. I just want you to understand that this means something to people every single day that are being impacted by this.
Chief Tank?
Yes, I apologize for my camera not working properly. And also, I want to thank this group for letting me into this space today. It's a great conversation, but I do want to talk about what Mike just said with regard to that testimonial. And I surely would like someday or somewhere at some point to actually possibly get a chance to hear those testimonials live. And, you know, what, like Caleb said, it does have a different, it does resonate different when you hear those testimonials and hear those live experiences. So just want to throw that out there. It would be great to hear those. Thank you.
Thank you. Raylene.
Just real quickly, I know it's come up before, when we do pull the data and with statistics, I can look at some of the cases that say one case was done in a day and another one took 281 days, one took 52 days. What it doesn't show is if these people were incarcerated or if there was a cite and release. What it doesn't show is if this person entered into a deferred prosecution and it took 5 years to complete the deferred prosecution for a dismissal. It doesn't show if somebody's on a stipulated order of continuance, that person was never incarcerated, but that case from start to finish took 2 years because they were going through a program to get counseling and assistance. So we can run all these numbers, VERA can run all these numbers, but it doesn't separate out the different situations that Caleb's talking about.
Mike.
And that is such an excellent point. And I was remembering Dr. Alexis Harris talking about some of the challenges with data, and that really to make it meaningful, you had to kind of clean it. You got to pour through it. And she had some methodologies. And Raylene, as you were talking, and one, I'm amazed at all the stuff that's in your head and didn't leak out, but which is incredible. But you bring up such a good point about going quickly to data sets without doing that careful work, is that we can go down wrong rabbit holes that may waste precious time. And so it's first comment, stop on the comment. The next is the question. To anybody that might have updates for us on any progress or any work or plans for Dr. Harris to help us with some of the data. And might this be the area, if this is not where we've already engaged her, that we might want to, just based on the intensity and the need that we're hearing about today?
Well, I can answer a little bit of that last piece, and that is that we've engaged with her off and on with the Stakeholder Advisory Committee process and the planning process. Her availability is obviously a challenge because she's very busy. So we will work on that, though. I think Stephen's got probably the best communication line into her, and maybe we can talk about that more. Stephen?
Yeah, I want to agree with what everybody said about not going straight down the rabbit hole of data. I think data sort of highlights some questions to ask, some investigations to make, some explanations to uncover. So that's the way that I was thinking about that particular VERA recommendation that I referred to. At the same time, that data that VERA had on case processing time took all of the different factors that Raylene cited into account, all of which probably apply in every other jurisdiction as well. And so there is some value in knowing that that data shows us as an outlier. We don't know exactly why, and there may be good reasons in Whatcom County why we're so different, but that's the kind of investigation, that's the kind of query, that's the kind of study that piece of data, unexplained as it is right now, could prompt us to undertake.
Okay, anything else on the VERA discussion? Okay, we will move on to the annual report. And Jill said you need about 10 or 15 minutes with us, okay?
Yes, thank you. I'm going to screen share an updated version of the report that's updated from some changes that were made this morning. I'd like to run through those with everyone, get your feedback, and then once that's done, open it up for additional comments, if that's okay. Can you all see my screen here? Yeah, okay. So this first one came from Mike Parker, just adding these couple sentences here to the section on GARE. Is there any objection to or suggested changes to his additional language? Stephen?
The formal name is the Whatcom Racial Equity Commission. And at the moment, there is no Whatcom Racial Equity Commission. There is work to develop a proposal that will go before the county council that we hope would result in the creation of such. So I think we need to correct the name and indicate its conditional or desirable future existence rather than suggesting, as this I think does, that there is such a thing right now.
Got it. Thank you. Anything else? Okay, the next one. These are some comments from Mike as well here that I would wanted to bring up. This paragraph that Mike has commented on is a reflection of the conversation that the task force had with the representatives Rammel, Shoemake, and Senator Sefcik in that conversation, you might recall. The comment you have here, Mike, on the first sentence, that was, I believe, a paraphrase of something that Representative Rammel said. So, and I don't recall there being a lot of objection to that. I think everybody kind of agreed to it. So steering committee, I can either remove that or I can go back and listen and get his exact quote and attribute that to Representative Rammel, or clarify that in some other way. Caleb?
I like the idea of getting his exact quote. That way we aren't filtering, you know, what it is that he's saying.
Okay. Does everyone agree with that, Stephen?
I don't think we really did talk about that, and I think it could be a matter of politeness as much as agreement that nobody wanted to argue a few words with Representative Rammel. I think it would be better to have something more neutral, like the resulting changes were responsive attempts to correct, to make corrections in bills enacted in 2021, or something like that.
Okay.
They were responding. They were attempts to correct. Whether or not everybody agrees with it is sort of finessed by that kind of wording.
I can do that. Does the rest of the committee here have a preference one way or the other?
I do think Stephen's suggestion will flow nicely, given that it's covering the session where we were talking with representatives. It's in context, it'll flow better. And I think it gets us out of, stating that opinion, which may or may not be consensus. So I, for one, would accept Stephen's suggestion.
I'm totally fine with that. I just didn't want to try and make a representation for our group that was based on something somebody else said. So I'm fine with what Stephen said.
Great, thank you, everyone. The second comment from Mike, the rest of this, challenges facing law enforcement today, that sentence, if I recall correctly, I think Chief Tank, you brought that up during the discussion with the representatives and Senator Sefcik. And so there was quite a bit of conversation about these challenges. And so I wanted to reflect that in this paragraph as well. It was something that the law enforcement side of the House seemed important to them. So I'm happy to change this up however you guys think is appropriate, or exclude it entirely, whatever you do.
I do think this sentence is factual. If we look at this year compared to last year, I guess my concern would be the word dramatic, because it's not dramatic in every pocket of Whatcom County. It is dramatic in certain areas. So I think if we set an increase, that might be sufficient.
Stephen?
I would go with Chief Tank's editorial suggestion. I also think we could frame this. I like what you added over here in the comment, the pink comment box, Jill. So my suggestion would be that we say something like, because we've touched on the legislative changes in the bills, and we could then say ongoing challenges facing law enforcement today include the increase in vehicle theft and property crimes for a variety of reasons, and then workforce issues, lack of jail space, court backlogs from COVID. Add those, just have a string about as ongoing challenges.
Okay. Mike, did you want to speak to your note here?
I think it is made better by the suggestions that have been added. So thank you. I think one of the things, Jill, that I wanted to bring out, it seemed an ideal place to honor the testimony from folks on law enforcement on these calls who have been informing us about what challenges are. And I just think it's important that it didn't all get tied up in that session with the representatives. There's ongoing challenges, and I really thought it valuable to try to bring it out. I didn't want to trust my own memory that I remembered all of the issues. So I was not trying to say that that was an exhaustive list, but I think it important to list them. So I would be happy with Stephen's suggestion and Chief Tanks on updating the property crime.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Any other comments on these notes from Mike?
Chief Tank or Caleb, do you have any thoughts on listing ongoing challenges? Would this be a satisfactory list to either of you?
Yeah, it works for me. I've been speaking with business managers in the area who are extremely frustrated with the inability to stop what they're characterizing as rampant theft, and they just have no ability to stop it. And the people who are perpetrating these acts know that they don't have any ability to stop it. And it's been frustrating for a lot of business owners. And the attribution is multifaceted, like Mike points out. There are many issues, lack of jail space, court backlog, COVID issues. Those are all valid things.
I think the things that we named are sufficient. However, I think somehow within that sentence structure that we do have to acknowledge that there are other factors and other things that contribute to this. And we certainly can't list them all. And in fact, we probably don't even know all the factors. So I do think we need to leave room.
Okay, great. Anything else? All right, so the next one is on the section for task force communications. And Mike, help me out here. I wasn't quite sure what you were trying to convey, and then I ended up just adding a bunch of stuff. I'm assuming that you're asking to add information on the groundwork that this committee has made. So I added a few things there.
Just in quick plain speak, that's exactly right. I mean, there was
Okay.
all that work done by the executive office and others to create a pathway so we could even get a communications consultant. And I just felt like this would be a time to bring that up. And if other task force members agree, I just think that's important. While we haven't necessarily acted on that yet, there was a lot of work to move it to a situation that could. Is that more clear than what I wrote?
It is. I threw together some language to do that. If you want to all take a minute to read through this and let me know if any of this works or not. The last paragraph that begins one highlight an example of communications, that comes from Heather Flaherty in looking at her Respond Whatcom webpage that they're developing on behalf of us and some of our partners. I was thinking that is going to be a really important tool for the community. And so I invited her to write a paragraph about it, and in the context of this IPRTF communications section. So that last paragraph is from her. Let me know if that works or does not work for you as well. Chief Tank?
Sure. So in that paragraph, it says the lead operations staff. I don't know the official title for that, but I don't think that's it. And also somehow in that paragraph, I think we need to acknowledge that lead is actually under the Whatcom County Health Department.
Okay. We can do that for sure. Jack?
In the second to last paragraph, when you say a list of potential campaign topics, I know you're talking about the communication campaign. I would insert communication there.
Okay,
Just for clarity. Thank you.
thanks. Anything else? Any other questions?
Not a question, just a comment. I think your additions in there are really great and they addressed my main concern and you
Okay.
worded it better than I would have in the first place. So thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Mike. I appreciate that. Let's see. Here, I couldn't add your note to this section, Mike, because it was a text box, but Mike's note here is referring to this section and whether or not we should add some additional programs and services. Stephen?
Would you explain to me what the men's residential treatment facility is?
Sure. It's run by Lifeline Connections. Opportunity Council developed it. We've frequently referred to it on the task force as drug court housing. And it was really for folks to be diverted from a system. We needed a low intensity, but inpatient and local facility. So that has been constructed, rehabbed, and opened.
So the Gerard Street property.
Bingo. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We could put the formal name. I suppose maybe that would make more sense. It's Lifeline's low intensity 3.1. I think I'm forgetting all the details. Maybe Arlene remembers, but that was that came out of the VERA report and the task force then trying to address that and making a call for that. So and I don't know what other steering committee members think about including some of those pieces in this section on VERA report. It just seemed to me to be things that were at least, if not directly recommended by the VERA report. I was not trying to infer that they were, but from the VERA report and the data that we got, the discussions that ensued, it seemed to me to be a good place to put some of the improvements and process things that have happened. So if folks agree, I would suggest that we flesh out that list a bit more.
I agree with Mike's goal there and with his two suggestions. I don't know what the name of that is, and I don't think naming the Gerard Street Residential Treatment Facility exactly as it's legally registered as is important, but I do think it ought to be called something that somebody reading this could tie back to the recommendation from the VERA report. So we can see the continuity of why we're listing that there.
If you guys could suggest what that should be, that would be really helpful. Any ideas off the top of your head? And if not, maybe think about it and email me later.
Well, I think usually we refer to it as drug court housing, drug court
Housing on Gerard Street.
Yeah, or clean and sober housing, serving drug court participants and others. I don't know.
Okay, great. Anything else that should be added to this list that you can think of?
What about supportive recovery housing? I know it's primarily drug court. maybe supportive recovery housing for now. I think that conveys it.
How
Okay.
about 24/7 supportive?
Well, I can give you a whole bunch of them. I'm trying to pick something that's appropriate, but I think supportive recovery housing would communicate it for now until we get something better and just be done at this point.
Okay, great. Thank you
Good,
very much.
good by me.
Yeah, next up, excuse me while I scroll past here. This is another sentence that came from Mike regarding the Behavioral Health Committee. I think it's pretty straightforward. I think I will spell out mental health and SUD. Any comments about this? All right. The committee's letter to the executive's office about ARPA funds in the report. Again, this comes from Mike. We reported on the ARPA letter from both the committee and then the final recommendation from the full task force in the end of year, the year-end task force report to council that happened just this past December. I'm happy to include that content in this report as well, since this is more of an overall in the past year report. So I can definitely add that for both the full task force and the Behavioral Health Committee, and then add the letter of recommendations as an additional appendix to this report, if you like. Is that a route you'd like me to go, Arlene?
I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. Is that a thumbs up for from the committee here?
It
I want a
is from-
thumbs. Go ahead.
Right.
I didn't want a thumbs up on my own suggestion, but I thought I just wanted to share that one of the reasons I put it here is kind of to keep our feet to the fire with this. And by having it in the report, we kind of remember to go through it. So I didn't put
Right.
I can't thumbs up my own suggestion, but I'm glad people agree.
Yeah, you can, Mike. And Barry, plug your ears. But I think feet to the fire is exactly the way I was thinking of this, because we really have had no engagement by the council in response to that letter that I'm aware of. And so it'd be nice to keep it on the front burner.
Yeah, where this was left off actually regarding the ARPA letter was Tyler Schroeder asked of the task force and the steering committee to get into that letter and come up with some more concrete, specific suggestions for programs and projects and that kind of thing. And I've kind of been waiting for one of you guys to take that up in your committees. So maybe think about doing that soon as we're approaching the budget season here pretty quickly. If any of you want to schedule that letter and its suggestions in your committee to come up with a deeper dive of suggestions, let me know and I can for sure add that. Mike?
I just wanted to comment that it was not without purpose that we did not list specific programs and interventions. We actually felt that it was a better place for a task force subcommittee to make recommendations about the larger issues and then defer to county staff as the experts, the purchasers, the creators of programs, the arbiters of those programs. So it was somewhat intentional. That being said, I think that possible either the whole subcommittee or members of the committee might engage in a conversation with, but I just wanted to make that comment that was actually very intentional on the part of because we didn't want to be seen as endorsing certain ones and weren't sure that was actually the place of a task force subcommittee to do that. However, working maybe with the behavioral health, oh gosh, what is what's BEGAT? Barry, help me. What's the behavioral health, the group of the Whatcom County Health Department?
The behavioral health gap analysis team, that one?
Yes. I wonder, Jill, if maybe members of the subcommittee might volunteer, because there's already a nucleus of folks, a ton of expertise in that group, and they're doing amazing work. But to further take on that charge from Deputy Executive Schroeder to look at things, and I think we could participate, but I hope people understand here why we didn't go down the road of specific programs. Does that sound like a path forward though, Jill? So it's not just saying, Yes, and
Yeah, from what I'm hearing, Barry, maybe that's something we can talk about in our SAC planning team meeting today is connecting the ARPA recommendations from the task force to Perry's behavioral health group. So we can definitely chat about that today. How does that sound?
That sounds good. I think once we form these strong teams like this, we need to be able to utilize them in the future as well. So I
Okay.
agree. Yeah.
So do you want me to still transfer the content from the December report into here about the ARPA letter? Stephen, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to loop back to exactly that point, Jill. I think it's useful to add a comment in here and to attach the report and simply say that we've gotten a response from county staff and the task force is going to proceed with a plan for how to address some of the general recommendations that were made in that letter.
Okay. Okay. Anyone else? Nope. Great, thank you. And that might be it. Yeah, I'm going to say that's it. So opening it up to the report, there's a couple of things that are different, just minor things. I think you'll notice underneath the title for each committee, I've added a call out for the committee members. Many of the committees have added a lot of non-task force members to their committees recently. And so I kind of wanted to highlight the expanded participation from other groups in the communities. So I ended up doing this for each committee. And then really that's about it. Are there any other comments, suggestions, changes? Stephen?
Jill, I noticed if you could scroll there, maybe the top of page 17 or 18, I can't remember where it was talking about the pretrial stuff.
Oh gosh, okay.
Yeah.
This is reentry. This is
Okay.
and then this is pretrial. Which section would you like me to go to?
It's the top of 19, that first sentence.
Okay.
The work group recommended the creation of a pretrial services unit. And I think that would highlight the leadership that work group did, and the council quite wisely approved budget provision for those staff. So that creation role I would like to see in there.
Yeah, that I can definitely add the history of that to this section. It's was done a number of years ago, so it's outside our annual time frame, but I think adding the context of the history is a good idea. So
okay. I thought I had a second smaller point there, but I'm not finding it. It's not triggering my memory. So if it comes back, I'll email you.
okay. Did anyone else have any other comments or suggestions? No?
Jill, you're an amazing author, and thank you for all the work you do and putting this all together and gleaning it. When I went through it and I put comments in, they're more additive, as you saw, really not corrective. So I just want to express that gratitude. I think you do such an amazing job trying to encapsulate the many threads that happen within this task force. And I just want to call that out. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mike. I appreciate that. That's good to hear. Let's see. I think those are all of my notes. Are you comfortable with me making the changes discussed today and then emailing the report back out to you for one more round of review? Or are you good until this comes up on the task force agenda? You guys want to see this one more time?
I'm good with it coming up at the task force agenda at this point.
Okay.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, excellent.
Sounds like somebody's playing Space Invaders, but I'm good.
It was my phone. Sorry, Caleb.
All right, that's everything I have on the report. Thank you so much, everyone. That was really helpful.
Okay, thanks, Jill. That's a great segue into our next items for next task force agenda. And then I had brought up that the pretrial subject, not necessarily just the pretrial services unit, but the whole kind of status on the effort is what I was thinking. And I don't know what everybody else thinks. We haven't heard anything about pretrial, any of those efforts for quite some time at the task force level. So, Caleb?
I met with some of the pretrial services unit, I think week before last, and have been invited to share some, or at least generate some data for their efforts. I think that it would be a good idea to listen to the experience of the folks who are on the pretrial services unit. Again, another one of those things where there may be good reasons, there may not be good reasons, but it doesn't sound like they're being utilized in a way that it'd be most effective for our criminal justice landscape.
Since I'm on that work group, I'll echo Caleb's sense of the background there. And it's sort of like the 8 blind men trying to identify the elephant. If you bring the judges in, it looks one way to them. If you bring John Kraus and his pretrial services staff in, it looks a different way. If you bring in people who really ought to be on electric home monitoring, but we still don't have that in the pretrial services unit, it looks a whole different way. So it would be important to try to get a holistic view and you know, not in a crude or accusatory way, but a critical view of what's worked and what is still in process there.
Do you think, Stephen, that they would be ready for our next task force meeting to be able to present something? I mean, or do you think they would need a little more time?
For 10 days from now?
I don't think they can do it in 10 days from now. That's why I asked.
Yeah, no, I don't think so.
So when I was talking next meeting, I meant one after this one.
So yeah, yes, I think they could.
Okay.
So the July meeting. Okay. And so the only thing then that I have for the June task force meeting is the annual report and your justice project update. Barry, is there anything else that you guys might want to schedule? We haven't done jurisdictional reports lately. We could add that. Committee reports, of course.
Is there anything else on the equity piece that we want to discuss at the task force level?
GARE, that's up to you guys. Yeah.
Just we had quite a lengthy conversation today, and I'm just wondering if the task force needs to be looped in on any of that.
I, for one, would say, yeah.
I think there's a timing problem with that. I'm going to be out of town next week, and then I think Mike is out of town after that. So what would be really useful to report on is this 4-way conversation between Mike and me and Jill and Jackie. And I don't know how much progress we're going to make that quickly on that one.
So maybe put that on for July as well.
Okay.
What do you think, Mike?
I think that's realistic, Stephen. Yeah, that makes sense. You know, on one hand, you don't want to put take your foot off the gas pedal, but on the other hand, you want something meaningful. So I think it makes more sense to get it right.
Caleb, is there anything you could report on the data dissemination, you know, the gathering reports and putting them out there, and any contact with IT about getting anything on the website? I don't know who has their hands on those tasks.
I can report that it is very slow.
Just for context, Stephen, Index Committee is this afternoon, so they haven't even met to see that data dissemination project yet. And just so you're aware that putting the information on the task force website, that's not our IT department, that's me. So I think I'll chat with Caleb maybe after the meeting and after index today. And Caleb, you can report out during committee reports at the task force meeting. So we might have some more information for you then, Stephen.
Great, that would be great. Thank you.
Raylene,
Just real quick to Caleb, I do have the query all built. I'm just asking AOC to give me 3 little things before I send it out. And I'm hoping that I'll have that today or tomorrow.
That's good. I didn't mean any impeachment of anybody in particular. I'm just saying that the whole process seems to get no traction and nowhere fast.
anything else for next meeting or even July, as we've been talking about?
Well, it sounds like I'm not sure if it's a vote or just moving it forward on the communications contract next week, but there might be something to report on that.
Yeah, and we do have it scheduled for the contract for consideration next week.
Okay.
Okay, so it sounds like the agenda for this month is going to be just some updates and quick discussion on the annual report, hopefully, and maybe we'll get out of there early.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Just a reminder to everybody that June 13th task force meeting, I will be unable to attend. Jack's going to lead us on his own. And probably do a better job than.
I doubt that. I'm prepared for that, but I did see Jill's note for council next week, Stephen. I have a pretty heavy conflict at 11 o'clock on Tuesday. Are you able to be there if they have questions?
Yeah, I'll do that.
Okay, and I will do the 13th.
Thank you.
Okay.
Good tag team, guys. Appreciate it.
Well, we're paid so well, you know, we show up for everything.
All right, anything else about items for task force agendas? Okay, we're almost at our adjourned time. Other business, keep in mind about budget requests. That's something that we need to really be thinking about getting something to the administration soon, you know, so let's be thinking about that. Raylene?
So real quick, Chief Tanksley, Amy Evanell, the record supervisor for Blaine, and myself recently went to the Axon conference, which is to learn about the body cams that are being implemented statewide. I'm sure other agencies may be using some different body cams, but there were some things that were interesting that I learned. We did attend a lot of different sessions, so Chief Tanksley may have other information on it, but some food for thought, some things that we may want to look into. They did mention something about Louisiana having a re-entry court program. They showed the cost for this program for those on it was $934 per year for re-entry court, whereas $19,000 per year for cost of incarceration. So I was looking at trying to get some more data to share out to Legal and Justice, but just something, food for thought on that. They also had body cams, the BD3 cams. They talked about some of the ride-along programs like what we're implementing here, but they had it where the officers would arrive on scene and they could live stream with a crisis or counselor session that would be able to feed information to the ear if you couldn't actually have somebody there on scene or go with a partner. So that was definitely an interesting aspect of looking at things differently. And the other one that I saw was, and I thought they were just talking about tablets for inmates in London. That was a pilot program, but I'm seeing that there's one in Pennsylvania and Philadelphia, and there's one in California that they're issuing tablets, limited access, but for helping for reentry, for education, to be able to connect with families. All different ideas came from a conference. Just let me know if you want us to explore any of these ideas in the future. Thanks.
Thanks, Raylene. That's great stuff. Stephen?
As to the agenda for the 13th, you reminded us of the budget process, Barry, and I'm just wondering whether there's anything that should be said at that meeting about where we are in that process. And I'm particularly wondering if Tyler's comeback to the ARPA letter was, we really want you to come up with something more specific that we can translate into a budget item. You know, if he's going to hold to that, that might be a conversation we want to have pretty soon.
Yeah, maybe Jill and I can work on formulating how we might present that. But yeah, we do have to get that in front of the task force as well, because we need to find out some deadlines and when we need to have some budget information done. So, and I think it's coming up.
So I can add an agenda item that is the upcoming county budget.
Yeah.
Okay.
Jack?
Just want to quickly offer myself as a resource for inmate tablets. I am an expert. I know a lot. I'm the vice chair of Narcotics Anonymous World Services. We license our IP to tablets around the country. We deal, I think we have about 50 contracts at this point. There's a lot of private. So anyway, I'm just throwing that out there, Raylene, if you need some help. We've been dealing with this issue for years. So not years, but about 3 years. So just thought I'd throw it out there in case it's helpful. Thanks.
Mike?
Quick note of thanks to Raylene for bringing fresh ideas. Thank you. Sometimes I feel like we're grinding on a mill. The other thing, and Jill or Barry, it occurs to me, you know, that behavioral health gap analysis group is going to do a presentation on an updated SIM. And, you know, we're going to do that live. I'm actually participating with some health department, amazing folks in doing that. This is really for the stakeholder advisory group. Barry, I'm curious, would it be possible to open to the task force, anybody to maybe in listen only? I know we want to defer to the SAC for any question and answer time during that session. But I you know, as I look at the SIM that is being updated and the work that's being done, I think the task force is going to be pretty interested in this. It really took the work we did, didn't erase it, built upon it, and it's like turbocharged. It's cooler, it's fancier, and it's I think it would be a useful tool. So Barry, if you think it might be appropriate, maybe we could circulate that meeting information to task force members if they're able to attend. And if not, then I would say maybe in our July meeting that we ask for some, just, you know, in the main task force as a whole, so they can also get that same information from that group.
Maybe we can actually add that to our already full agenda for later today for our SAC planning process. Caleb?
Just wanted to respond to the tablets. So our contract for inmate communication, including tablets, is up for renewal this year. So we're going to be looking at potential new vendors for inmate tablets. So just throwing that out there. If you guys have input, I'm all ears. So.
Hey, Stephen?
I think the research on information gathering is that it's always more effective to have to opt out than it is to opt in. And so rather than inviting task force members to the SIM presentation, I personally would be in favor of redoing the presentation at the next task force meeting if the presenters wouldn't mind that. I agree with Mike that there's been a lot of work there, a lot of changes, updates, expansions. And I'd rather put it right in front of task force members rather than hoping they see an interest in tuning in.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, Stephen. I think we could invite them to tune in as well, but we should probably redo the presentation. I'll check in with Perry and find out availability of those folks to be able to do that. Anything else?
Just as a reminder, Perry is on the task force, so hopefully we'll already be available to do that.
That's true, yeah. Anything else under other business? Okay, we'll move to public comment. Is there anyone that would like to speak, Jill?
There aren't any attendees, virtual attendees, and I don't see anyone in our conference room, so I would say no. I know we're running over, but Caleb and Barry, if you have a few minutes after the meeting, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, folks, we will see you soon, and safe travels to Stephen. Jack, you looks like you're back home from.
Yeah, I'm not in Arizona anymore. Yeah.
You look like you were going through like a sweat lodge thing when I saw you down there. What were you doing?
Oh, no, I was sitting by a pool with yeah, I was sitting, no sweat lodge. It was,
No
no,
sweat
just a
lodge.
big, nice house.
Okay, awesome.
All right.
All right.
See you at 3:30 or whatever
Yeah.
it is. Exact. Okay.
3:30, yeah.
All right.
All right, everybody.
everyone.
Caleb and I will hang out with you, Joe.
I hope
Hi,
you guys
everyone.
noticed. I hope you guys noticed my pride shirt. I wore it for you.
I see it, yeah.
Thank you.
All right.
I thought it was cool and trendy.